Welcome back to Post Sports Live. I'm your host, Jonathan Forsythe, and joining me on the full show is LaVar Arrington, Dan Steinberg, and Nats beat writer Adam Kilgore. Welcome back to the show, Adam. It's been a while.
Thanks, man. Yeah, it's good to be here.
Did you not send them all about wearing the dark blue
sweater?
sweater?
You look too spiffy with the club, with the jacket over the sport coat.
I think, Mitch told me to wear a jacket, so I did.
All right, well, at least one of us looks good today. We got a lot to talk about the show. With Adam here, we're going to do a good season preview for the Nationals. We'll talk about some of the roster additions, the early impressions of new manager Matt Williams. We'll talk about whether the most important player on the team is, if you had to choose one, who is it going to be? Not necessarily the best player, the most important to the team this year. We'll, of course, get to the Redskins and get LaVar's thoughts about the team franchising Brian Orakpo, and your guys' thoughts about our colleague Jason Reed's strong stance against that, and I think he classified it as bad management. And we'll talk about the Wizards, who are still above 500 despite losing last night. There's some discussion in the NBA circles. I think, Dan, that you posted on last week, that Charles Barkley still thinks they're the third best team in the East. We'll get your guys' thoughts on that. And the Caps, good start post-Olympics break with a couple road wins. Came back down to earth with a loss against Philly, another 2-goal lead they give up. We'll get your guys' thoughts about the Orlov suspension and the possibility of Kuznetsov joining the team and what he might mean in the near future. All right, guys, let's start with the Nationals, and I want to get to a quote from Doug Fister, one of the additions to the roster this year from spring training, on Matt Williams as new manager.
As soon as the phone call was made that I had been traded, sheer excitement had come over me to know that I'm going to be playing for the Nationals, who is a great team, and to be able to play for Matt Williams. Was able to watch him as a kid growing up in San Francisco when he was playing for the Giants, and now getting to know him on a personal level. And the sheer love for the game, the excitement, the fire that he brings every day, he really sets the example and sets that tone for us, and he's done that from day one, and that's a great thing for us as a team.
I love this time of year, especially when there's snow on the ground here in D.C. and seeing those beautiful sunny Florida sights. Adam,
I was there, man.
You were there. You were there. You're here now. You're going back there.
How happy and jovial guys are when there's no wins or losses on your.
Adam, I want to get your early impressions of Matt Williams first.
Yeah. I think he's been really impressive ever since his first press conference. He's sort of done and said all the right things. The players, even sort of in off the record, just sort of casual conversations, the players and the older players really have taken to him and like him a lot so far. Now, it's really, a first-year manager like LaVar just sort of mentioned, when there's no losses, there's no wins. It's hard to sort of evaluate a guy now, where he hasn't made any really decisions. We have no idea how he's going to react or how the room will perceive him when they lose their first, have their first 4-game losing streak or something. So there's certain, I wouldn't say the jury's in, but so far he's been really impressive and has every indication that he's going to do a really fine job for a first year.
What's different in this year's spring training, the way he runs it versus how Davey ran it last year?
Yeah, it's definitely natural to compare. I don't want to make it seem like Davey was just kind of rolling the balls out, but there is a lot more sort of regimentation. There's a lot more meticulous planning. The schedule is just kind of laid out every single morning. Guys know exactly where they need to be, how they need to be doing what they're doing. And so there is definitely a little more sort of edge, a little more crispness to the practices, for sure. There's no question. I think like Denard Span mentioned one day, he said, I felt like I knew I had to take a left step every 3 seconds. So it's like they feel like everything is just mapped out for them totally. And I think and Williams is sort of taking that with himself as well. I mean, he's doing the very first day there, he was practicing where he needed to stand in the dugout so the third base coach could see his signs. And now Davey probably would have been on a golf course somewhere at 4 p.m., which, again, there's nothing, they won 98 games and had a great start 2 years ago, so it's not like you can invalidate Davey's ways. But certainly it is different, and I think it's probably what this team needs. I think it's, and they're willing to do it because they were disappointed with how last year went. And the way Williams kind of presents it, I was kind of worried, hearing about all the planning and all the sort of daily quotes he puts up there, that some of the veteran guys would sort of roll their eyes or say, whatever. But the way he goes about it, the way both in his demeanor and just sort of the practical way he goes about it, it's something that they can apply it. It's very applicable to how they go about their day. And so it's not just sort of eyewash, as the baseball term goes.
Last question on Williams. How about his personal relationship with some of the players? Is that different. It must be different than the way Davey sort of. I mean, this guy's much more of a contemporary to some of these guys. They probably saw him play when they were growing up. How's the personal relationships?
That's definitely one of the biggest factors too. Is that he had a lot of sort of. It was almost like an instant credibility he had with the guys because they watched him growing up. They know. He knows what they're going through because he played, less than 10 years ago. He was still in the game. He's been close to the game, for that span too. So he's a young guy who understands. Davey certainly understood the game. I think Matt Williams definitely has a better understanding of like a modern player more so than Davey. And he's not going to be telling people about Steven Strasburg putting like icy hot in the wrong spot before start. So I think that's a really huge thing for the players though, is that how closely he is to them and how well he understands them as a contemporary.
Let's get to some of the roster additions, and obviously Pfister we heard from already, and Nate McLouth, another one that's going to play a big role off the bench. How big a role will both of these guys play, do you think, in the success of this team?
Yeah, Pfister's huge. I mean, that's the sort of when you talk to scouts or people from other teams or whatever, that's the one thing that people think really kind of separates the Nationals this year compared to last year is how good of a fourth starter Doug Pfister can be. I mean, he's a guy who over the past 3 years, if you go by WAR or some other stats, he could be like a top 10 pitcher in the majors over the last 3 years. And so, assuming he stays healthy, which he generally has been, he was on DL last year a little bit with a small thing, but he is a huge factor. McLouth is also a huge factor in sort of a more subtle way. He'll give them a much better option off the bench for all three outfield spots. He's a guy that can give even Span a day off and play center and lead off if you need him to. So they should be a lot more. They should have a lot more consistency in their options if Harper goes down for a month like he did last year, or if Worth misses 30 games like he did last year. They're much, they're well suited because they have McLouth, and also he kind of pairs well with Harrison too. If someone's out for a long period of time, that's a pretty good left-right platoon you have there. So I think that was a pretty slick pickup and fits his team really well.
Question about Danny Espinosa's role on the team. From early reports, it seems like Williams really likes him. Where do you see him fitting in this year?
I think for right now, he's a utility guy. I mean, they've said that he has a chance to win back a second base job. But I think that's just kind of something you say, and I don't blame him for saying that. But I mean, just look at what Rendon did last year and his potential. They really can't, you can't disregard that when you go for that. So I think he'll start the year as a utility guy. I guess it's not inconceivable that he would start in the minors if he has a bad spring or if they feel like the pieces fit better. But like you said, I think Williams does like him a lot. And really, he's the only guy who can play shortstop behind Desmond. So if Desmond gets hurt, if they want to give him a day off once every week or every 2 weeks, he's your guy there too. So
we talked last year about one of the big problems with the team, LaVar and Dan, being the bench. Do you guys really see more improvement based on some of the McLouth signing, maybe Espinosa off the bench?
I was actually going to ask you. Obviously for months and months we were talking about how bad the bench was last year, but I don't remember us talking about that in March. It's not like they went into the season.
Oh no, I wrote a story about how good their bench was last year. Because it seemed. I mean, their bench was awesome in 2012. They brought back the same guys, so that's a good point. I mean, there is sort of an inherent volatility when it comes to both your bench and your bullpen.
And McLouth, I didn't even realize until I was listening to John Feinstein, who's got his new book about minor league baseball. McLouth was out of the game basically just a couple years ago.
Yeah, he's a good story, man. I mean, he had some really, really bad years with the Braves and Pirates. But last year he had 600 plate appearances and was an everyday player for an Orioles team that won 85, 86 games. So I mean he sort of has I think he was with Norfolk in 2012 with the Orioles in AAA and really turned his career around. But yeah, I mean he's more of a guy like last year. Their bench players were more sort of guys who could sort of go between maybe a good AAA player or a bench player. I feel like McLouth is more like maybe a starter or a good bench player.
And the Orioles didn't make the playoffs 2 years ago in 2012 without McLouth in that second half.
He had a great year and a half, on his belt. I mean, he wasn't great last year, but he was a very serviceable, very good everyday player, which makes him an excellent bench player. You would think.
And he's got speed, so he can also steal bases when he
That's
comes
right,
in and
yeah.
does play. All right, we talked about this last week on the show, Adam, without you, and we're talking about the biggest obstacles for the team this year. Last year, we talked a lot about the curse of high expectations. There were obviously injuries. There are many things you can point to as far as why they didn't win the division again. What do you see as their biggest obstacle in 2014?
Yeah, I would say number one would be the Braves, just because they have so much talent coming back. I think too, injuries are always, you can say that for all 30 teams right now, but I think the biggest maybe injury risk that's sort of, as it goes overlooked is how healthy when you look at Jordan Zimmerman, Gio Gonzalez, Doug Fister, those three guys have all been really healthy for a long time, which is what you would think is a positive. But healthy pitchers tend to not stay healthy, so it's not like guys are due for injuries, but they happen to pitchers, and so the Nationals are definitely better situated to deal with injury in the rotation this year than they were last year with guys like Tanner Roark and Taylor Jordan, even like a Ross Ollendorf. All had pretty good years last year. So they do have pitching depth, but I mean, what makes them good is how strong their pitching is. So if they lose one of those guys, that would be tough to deal with.
We've gone almost 10 minutes now without even bringing up Strasburg or Harper's names. I'd be remiss not to ask you about them. Do you expect career seasons from both of them? And if not, which one do you think is more likely to break out?
Harper hasn't had much of a career, so
I'm just saying, it's his third year now.
I mean, Strasburg has definitely stood out to me down there. A lot of teammates kind of talk about what an effect, sort of like what a positive effect fatherhood has had on him. He had his first kid this winter, and they say that he seems to have a different focus. I think he's always been a guy who's worked really hard, and now I think he knows how to apply that work a little better. I think he's like working smarter. He seems to just be more sort of in control. When he's throwing bullpen sections, when he's doing whatever, he seems to be very in like a really good place. And we've probably said that before at spring training because it's spring training. It's hard to be in a bad place when you're down there. But he does seem to be sort of like poised to just have like a huge top 3 kind of Cy Young season. And Harper looks great. His knee's been so far so good. That's definitely something they're going to watch. But if he's healthy, I mean, I go back to like the first month of last season before he hit the wall in Atlanta. I mean, he was the best player in the National League for a whole month. And even his problems with like hitting left-hand pitching didn't really start until he hurt that knee. I think that hurt like his extension of the swing. He hurt kind of how athletic he could be in the box. And so if he's got that figured out, he's going to go back to like the 140, 150 OPS plus range, and 30 and 100 if he stays healthy. That's So I mean, it should be for both those guys. They do seem poised to have their best years.
I love Harper. He does a million interviews about running into the wall and says, he's going to be smarter this year, and if he's hurt, he's going to take the time off that he needs. He's not going to rush himself back in, whatever. And he's got like flu-like symptoms, and he's trying to argue his way into a spring training like in early March.
He's itching to get out there.
I think that's actually a good point. I mean, Davey would probably would have let him play, I think Williams is going to be a little smarter about. I mean, last year Harper was like limping around on like obviously everyone in the stadium on one leg, and Davey just said, "I like watching him play. I'm gonna put him out there."
All right, last Nationals question. LaVar, I'll start with you on this one. Most important player to the Nationals' success this year, or pivotal, if you want to describe it that way. Who do you think, LaVar?
Pivotal, I'll say Denard Span, and the reason being is I think that he has to be versatile with defense, being very important and playing what is that center field, I believe. But also being the leadoff batter for this team. They had such difficulties trying to figure out who was going to be the leadoff, what was going to be the order, and ultimately I felt like one of the biggest letdowns of the season was their consistency offensively. So I think the leadoff guy sets the tone for that. So I'm going to say Denard Span for me.
He was great at it towards the end of last year.
Toward the end. He started out slow, but he really caught fire toward the end. Dan, who's your most important player?
I was going to say Adam LaRoche. I think that when you talk about pivotal, kind of the difference between being an elite team and being an above average team, 2 years ago LaRoche was incredible, and last year he was awful. And the difference between those 2 seasons is so dramatic. Who knows? He's probably going to fall somewhere in between those 2 seasons I would expect this year. But if he's a lot closer to 2012 than 2013, I think it changes the complexion of the offense. And if he is dropping off, and if this is, sort of the beginning of the decline of his career, that kind of puts a lot of other things into flux into play in the infield. And so I think that getting LaRoche back to being a productive middle of the lineup hitter is pivotal.
All right, so Span, LaRoche, who do you got, Adam?
I'm going to say Wilson Ramos. I think and the major thing for him is health. Mm-hmm. If he stays healthy, you basically have. If he hits for power like he did last year, you've got another, essentially a middle of the order bat, power-wise. You can also play an above-average defensive catcher, and pitchers like throwing to him a lot. He's really good back there, framing up pitches and stuff like that. So if he stays healthy, that's and hits for power, he makes the lineup really that much deeper and that much more dangerous.
All right, I got 7 seconds to add mine. You guys all overthought it. It's Harper. He's an NL MVP candidate. he's just as important as anybody to this team. Again, if he stays healthy.
Yeah, but I think that it's certainly
obvious pick.
Yeah, I would.
It is. You're right.
Kind of take him for granted. I don't.
Yeah.
It's hard to imagine him.
No, I
really
appreciate
collapsing.
the thought you guys put in that. That's very good. All right,
think you assume he's gonna do
let's
what he's
transition
supposed to
now. LaVar, got to get your thoughts on the Redskins franchising Brian Orakpo. Last week you predicted that. So if that wasn't actually a bold prediction segment for us, but you would have nailed it. Tell us about your thoughts now that it's official.
I think that they want to do a long-term deal. I think that the numbers that the Washington Redskins want to put in the deal are far apart from. That's obvious with Orakpo and his camp. You can't. The most compromising and difficult piece of all of this is you see what Brian Orakpo could be. You want him to be a part of your team, but it's not necessarily justifiable. So it kind of puts everybody in kind of a difficult situation. So I know Jay Reed doesn't like the move. I tend to say that this defense has been poor since Haslett has taken over, and what will they do to be different now is going to be the biggest question. But you'd have to assume Jim Haslett's job being on the line, Raheem Morris, anybody else who has been retained, all of their jobs are on the line. So you'd have to assume there has to be something that you see differently, and having one of your main guys, and in Haslett's mind, that's one of his main guys. You got to have your horses in your own mind if you're going to dial up the type of defenses that are going to at least give you a chance to be successful. So I don't think it comes as a surprise that they franchise him. I thought it was interesting that they put the not non-exclusive franchise tag on him, but I think it was a smart play. If you were going to franchise him, then franchise him that way, because now that can in essence give you more negotiating power going into getting a long-term deal done if no one jumps at it, which you have to assume giving up multiple first-round draft picks to get them is not feasible.
That's way too high a cost.
So it's just going to be one of those things where I think Orakpo wants to be a part of this team. They want him to be a part of the team, and they'll get a long-term deal done.
I think it's interesting the way you put it too, because if if it was a few $1 million less, if it was $8 million or something, I think everyone would want him to be part of the Redskins defense. It was, even with fans, the question was how much of our salary cap space now do we want to give up for this guy? It's not like they didn't think that he could contribute to the team or be a part of the team. And so, I think the question other people had is, yeah, you've got this extra $30 million of cap space. Has this team proved that it will go out and get valuable pieces with that space? Obviously, there's some different guys making the calls right now, but I think that's the fear for the people who did want to keep Orakpo, is who knows what kind of players you're going to bring in. You're not guaranteed good players to bring in if you're replacing him.
Well, what do you know how do you know he's going to be?
Well, you don't. Yeah, you don't. You're right.
He hasn't transitioned into that next
I think you're right.
level
That's
of
the point.
player.
That's the point that
all signs point to them letting him rush more next year potentially. And
didn't he rush a lot this year?
He didn't rush as much as some of those
they've
blue
said,
chipper
they've
types.
said that they want to let the linebackers loose more.
My question, Adam, follow-up question is: does this sort of transition or the franchise tag, does that make it more or less likely that he'll sign eventually? They'll come to an agreement on a longer-term deal with Orakpo.
It seems like maybe less. I guess it depends. Like LaVar, how far apart are they now? Is what it comes down to. If they're really far apart now, it probably makes it less likely, because now the Redskins have a little more, even more leverage over him than they had before. So it seems like it wouldn't help get a long-term deal if they were close anyway. And this is something they just did almost more procedurally to kind of keep the ball moving, I guess. Then I guess it would make it more likely. So I guess it all depends on sort of how close or not close they are now. But it does seem like too. I mean, if you let this guy go. Who are you going to replace him with? You're probably going to have to pay more money for a player who might not be as good.
Guy. You could get Rob Jackson is a serviceable guy. When he came in and filled in for Orakpo, he was probably a bigger playmaker at the position than what Orakpo was previously.
For those few games in 2012,
right?
He was
so
pretty good.
The thing about it is, this team has so many needs.
Let's take one more minute on Orakpo.
I think it goes back to what Dan just stated. It goes back to the fact that there are so many needs on this team that are you going to eat up cap space on this one player that you're not for sure he can be that next level guy or that much of a difference maker. A lot of people make the statement that Orakpo, you see his highlights and you think that he's one of the best pass rushers in the game. If you watch his game film, you know that it's quite a different story. So it's kind of where do you fall on how you view Orakpo and if he's worth that type of money, because you can fill in and give yourself depth. I mean, if Seattle didn't prove the point that you don't have to have high-priced, high-round draft picks to be able to win games, maybe you haven't learned the lesson yet.
Seattle has a different front office also, though.
Well, he was here, one of those guys, the lead guy.
Well, I wanted to quickly follow up on you, LaVar. One of the things you've been critical of the Redskins in the past on this show has been about the lack of building out and growing talent. And is this, in your opinion, a way that they could be sort of not giving up on Orakpo, but continuing to build him and see some growth potential in him?
I mean, they haven't developed him, so I don't know why you would assume that you're going to do something differently.
Okay.
I think that's something that we have to wait and see how they come out and how they play. But historically speaking, Dan, they have not developed guys.
Yeah, we were just talking. I think in the last 30 years, there's something like 3 first-round picks who have signed a second contract with the Redskins. The thing about developing guys, though, is LaVar is one of them. But it all sort of requires some kind of continuity in the front office. The people who drafted Brian Orakpo are not here anymore, so it's not like they have a vested interest in developing this player they drafted.
No, it's all part and parcel of the situation. It'll be interesting to see how he's motivated and what kind of numbers he puts up this year, on a one-year franchise deal. All right, let's turn our attention out of the Wizards, Dan. The team lost a tough one last night, but they've been playing well. They're 3-1 without Nene. Early returns are good without the big man. Can they keep it up?
I mean, it goes back to what I said last week. They play so many bad teams down the stretch. I think they definitely can keep it up because, like I said, clearly without Nene, they're still not a bad team. They're just kind of less good, I think. But, Monday night, they didn't have Kevin Seraphin. They didn't have Martell Webster. At some point, if you take all of those rotation players away, you're definitely going to see an effect. And Memphis is pretty good, actually. But they just have so many upcoming games against terrible teams that I think that, to me, it would be a disappointment if they don't finish above 500 with the games they have left, regardless of when Nene comes back. I just think that they have too much talent compared to these horrible teams they're playing.
And Adam Silver lining last night.
Adam Silver.
Otto Porter got some legitimately good minutes last night and actually helped lead the team to a comeback.
Yeah, I think I don't know. If Porter seems like I don't know if
he's still
hard
buried.
To find a silver lining in Porter season, I guess. But last night they were undermanned. They had no big men against a team that has very good big men in Memphis, and they still, they could have lost that game by 20 points easily, and they still made it close to the end. I think that's more encouraging than what Porter did specifically.
Dan, one of the things you posted on last week was Charles Barkley's comments about the Wizards, and LaVar, I want to ask you about that. Barkley still maintains, even without Nene, that the Wizards are the third best team in the East. Do you think that they can actually climb to that position in the playoffs? Is that sort of best case scenario at this
certainly
point?
Best case scenario.
With a couple months left.
That is best case scenario. But this backcourt is playing so well right now. I mean, we haven't mentioned Trevor Ariza, but he's playing like how he played when he was in L.A. and helped that team win a world championship. So
Gortat doing great since
they're playing some real inspired basketball. They look really confident, and if they continue to play with that amount of confidence and can get healthy and stay healthy, I think that's the biggest thing. I mean, we talked about that with the Nationals. We're talking about it now with this team as well. It's their health. The health is going to be the deciding factor as to how well this team and how much of a push they can make down the stretch and being seeded. But the East is wide open. Outside of the top two with Indiana and Miami, the East is wide open. I think the Bulls are coming around, even without Rose.
Yeah.
But
2 games behind the Bulls right now, the Wizards are.
And I think it'll come down to those two teams as to who if the Wizards don't have some type of collapse. We won't say uncharacteristic because characteristically they probably do collapse. But if they can maintain a slow burn, a steady build, I think that they'll be right where they need to be.
I mean, I think it is. I understand what Barkley's saying. I think though you might almost say that in terms of young, recognizable talent, the Wizards probably do have the most outside of the top 2 teams in the East. But you look at it, it's going to be the teams that are going to be the 3, 4, 5, and 6 seeds are going to be the Wizards, the Raptors, the Bulls, and Brooklyn in some combination. And all of those possible opponents have some kind of red flag for the Wizards. They've been really bad against Toronto. They needed 3 overtimes with Toronto having a million guys fouled out and gone with injury. So that's a tough matchup. The Bulls have been one of the best teams in the East since January. They've been playing great. And Brooklyn, you sort of have the sense all year that they're kind of waiting for when it really matters because they're all like 70 years old. But like I don't know that the Wizards would feel comfortable going against a team with that many kind of playoff tested guys, with all of the Wizards making their first playoff appearance. So I think that I understand what Barkley's saying, and I think maybe next year or 2 years from now. But I think that any of these potential playoff matchups are still pretty scary for the Wizards.
And that makes all the more important to be in the top 4 to get the first round home court advantage against any of these teams. Although they are 500 at home.
I think the Bulls are 24-11. I think in their past however many games 35 games. So that's I mean I think the Bulls are clearly number 3. But then the Wizards are sort of in that next group that Dan just talked about.
It'll be a dogfight down to the stretch. We'll see how that goes. And the next coming games, they got Utah at home, winnable. Then they're at Milwaukee. That's another winnable game. They could sort of maintain this momentum that was slightly stopped with the loss last night. Then they're at Miami. So
you mentioned finishing 500 for the Wizards. I think it would be a disaster if they didn't.
Really?
Well, I mean,
even without Nene. See, I would disagree with that. But these guys seem to be on your side. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean the one thing that worries me is how tight the rotation is now. Because I mean it's not. It doesn't seem like Whitman is giving anyone Nene's minutes except the people who are already taking a lot of minutes.
Well, I hope to see.
With Nene, now they're not.
I know it's because of Webster, but I hope to see more Porter. You know, he showed that he could play a little bit. I know that it's that's sort of a reach, but I'd like to see a little bit more of him down the stretch. It is a tight rotation, though. You're right. We'll see how that plays as the season goes on.
No, I don't mean. I just mean he's like Vesely in that you're like pulling for him. Like, yeah, kid, you can do it. But it's like. He's the 3rd overall pick. It shouldn't be like that.
You're right, but he needs to get more minutes to prove that it's not going to be like that and just has established himself. We'll see.
Yeah,
all right, well, for Adam Kilgore, Dan Steinberg, LaVar Arrington, I'm your host, Jonathan Forsythe. We'll get to Caps next week. We've been cut short this week because we had too much Nationals talk. So, Adam, thanks for joining us.
There can never be too much.
Later in the season,
that's our winning team.
I hope to see you again. I hope to see you again during a break, maybe the All-Star break, maybe sooner if possible. So thanks for joining us for your Nationals insight and all sports insight. Any final thoughts, guys? No. All right. With that, we'll see you next Tuesday on Post Sports Live. Thanks. UVA, #1 in the ACC.
Oh, yeah, we should
How about
talk
that?
about UVA.